ADHD reWired, episode 450. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to adhddiversified.ca to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at adhddiversified.ca. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. We are here for our first Q&A of 2022, which means we all survived 2021. Woohoo!
Yay!
All right, we have almost our entire usual panel. We have MJ from ADHD Diversified. How's it going, MJ?
Oh, it's going. Happy to be here. And it's not minus ridiculous outside. Not that I have to leave the house, but
glad that you are here.
Canadian bragging rights.
Canadian bragger. I know it was like crazy cold the other day for you. All right. Then on the other side of me here on Zoom, we have Coach Roxie Martin. How's it going, Roxie?
It's good. It's a good Tuesday. Glad to be here.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
And we have Brendan Mahan, the host of ADHD Essentials. How's it going, Brendan?
Going well. You?
I am doing well. Thank you.
Yay.
We have the host of Hacking Your ADHD, none other than Mr. Will Curb.
Glad to be here. I was a little bit behind on things, so glad I could ADHD my way into it.
Were you saying that you were late?
Yeah.
Glad you're here. And next to Will on my screen, we have Barb McDonough, ADHD reWired's community manager, my executive assistant, and back from quarantine vacation. No, it wasn't really a vacation, but glad to have you back.
Not at all. But we got through it. The family got through it, and I'm glad to be here.
So glad to have you back, Barb.
Thanks.
And we have our first question. Let me first also mention that Moira is not here today. She'll be back next month. All right. We have our first question. We have Samantha. And what is your question?
Hello. So I am curious about y'all's take on the pros and cons of using the same versus separate task management systems for professional and non-professional tasks. Right now I'm using the same one, and I like the simplicity of only having one place to enter tasks and one place to organize them from. But I do find it distracting and overwhelming sometimes to be able to see my non-work tasks while I'm trying to pay attention to work tasks.
All right. Was that a question for Will? It sounded like you maybe were interested in Will's opinion, or did I hear that incorrectly?
Oh, that was a question for everybody.
Okay. All right. I thought I heard Will at the start of that question. So, okay.
Well, I think y'all's takes, which might not have come across quite right.
All right. Well, now I want to know Will's take on this.
That is a bit of a problem for having, it's hard to have two systems, but also have one system where you have the distractions of seeing your other tasks. One way to kind of mitigate this is trying to find something that can help you have that's context dependent on what you see, because context is one of the most important parts of having a to-do list, because if you can't do the thing, it doesn't matter if you're reminded about it. So that's going to depend on what you use as your to-do list. But then if you don't have that, a great way to, if you're doing something like written or something, just color code it. I love colors, so that's something I always love doing, but also trying to balance that with going, okay, I'm going to decide these well in advance so that I'm not color coding as I'm going, because everything wants to be your favorite color then.
I always find it interesting when people with ADHD can actually maintain a color coding system, because I like color because it makes it pop and it can be random, but my brain remembers it. But color coding requires you to always have, if you're doing an analog version of color coding, what do you do if your yellow highlighter runs out and you're counting in yellow for a certain code?
This is why you buy a box of the stuff you like.
That's why, right? I mean, okay. This is a great question too, and it's funny because I did not realize that I had really no home-based task management system for years. I mean, I think it was like a year or two ago that I found like, oh, this is why I'm really not getting anything done at home because I'm not tracking anything. I have no way to cue myself, right? So for a while, one of the things that I was using, and I still use sometimes, is just a little like 11 by 14 magnetic dry erase board that goes right on the fridge because that's where I see the stuff that I need to do. But sometimes that stuff stays on there for so long that it just becomes wallpaper. Something that I'm using now, over the last couple of months, I got an Apple Watch. And with the Apple Watch, you can have what they call complications, which are just like little widgets for your watch face. And one of the ones that I like is where you can have a to-do item on there, and it will give you one to-do that will actually show up. So if you have a due date and it's for today, that will show up on your watch face. It gives you one. If you have more than one on that day, it'll just say like 2 items due today or something like that, which is very not helpful to me. But if it tells me like the one thing, I actually found that really helpful. So for work, I use Asana. For all my personal stuff, it's a combination of kind of random notes on the dry erase board, using iOS reminders. I probably overall use iOS reminders for home-based stuff more than anything else. What about everyone else?
I want to jump in and say, I don't really care what you do for a task management system, but I have very strong opinions about calendaring. As in, if at all possible, only have one.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't, right? Like there's people working for the government who have like their job calendar has to be separate from everything else. And I respect that. But if you're not in that situation, one calendar is the way to go because you only have one life, right? You only have one section of 24 hours in the day. So you got to keep the calendar as uniform as possible. Outside of that, task management stuff, I don't know, whatever works. Pieces of paper is fine. Asana is fine. Whatever you like.
I'm definitely with you, Brendan, on having the calendar all in one place. I use Google Calendar, and I love that I can have a million different Google Calendars with their own colors, all for separate things, but they all show up in the same place.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I also do, because I'm tackling most of my sort of home-based tasks on the weekends. So one of the things that I do when I'm planning my weekend is I'm going to say time block in a very loose way. I put time blocks on my calendar for how long the particular thing that I need to do is going to take, but does not necessarily correspond with the actual time that's on the calendar. So let's say I need to go to a couple stores and then I want to do a home project and then something with my son. Like I'll sort of lay that out so I know, okay, like here are the things I want to do today. And the thing that I listed last, I might end up doing first. So then I just know, all right, I still know how much sort of total time. So that works kind of well for me when I'm planning my weekends. Anyone else have other things they do?
I'm that weird person that has multiple calendars in different places, but also it's for a little bit of the novelty. I don't know about y'all, but I get bored pretty easily of stuff. And so just being able to change it up will, just so everyone knows, Will definitely made a face that reacted to that because we all know what it's like to get bored of something. Just to be able to switch it up and also having a list of those places to look. Because I have multiple places that I look and because I do like to switch it up every so often, if I don't have that inventory of where certain lists go of certain buckets in my life, guess who's not going to remember it? Me. So I have a list of the places that I go to for certain tasks and certain buckets, and having those listed under like the task management apps or the calendars that I use for each specific bucket. So then that way I'm not mixing and matching.
So you're saying you have a list of your lists and a list of your like inboxes that you have to check?
I'm a chronic overplanner, but it has been helpful. And when I am not using them at all, then everything goes to pot. So if you do have to switch task management apps, or if you're just trying stuff out, try them first. Because if we use it for a day and then it doesn't work, it's probably because we didn't try using it for long enough. But keep it as simple as you can for yourself and find what works for you. It's all beta mode.
That's right. This life is all beta mode. Just keep trying stuff, right? Sam, I hope that was helpful for you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm waffling because this system works better than any system that I've used in the past, but it's not right. So the idea of moving to a different thing is terrifying. So I'm going to try to see if I can make this, if I can adjust this one. And
I was going to let you go, but then you said that. So now I have a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
Okay. So you said it's working better than anything that you've ever done in the past.
Yes.
But it's not right. Can you define what you mean by that? Because what I'm hearing is perfectionism.
Yes. And I am definitely susceptible to perfectionism. I'm the first to admit that. So it's working in the sense that I like having the one place to collect all of my tasks. And I've been using Todoist for a long time now. So I'm pretty comfortable with it. And I can easily set what project things are at and what the priority level is.
So the capture process is working great for you.
The capture process is really good and much simpler than using multiple systems.
Okay.
What ends up happening is that on any given day, I'll have my priorities set and it'll sort of sort them by project. So I'll have my work things in one section, but I can still see all of the things. And that can make it sort of complicated during the day where I'll be like, I know these are supposed to be work hours and this is, supposed to is in quotes there, but I know that I also want to go for a walk today and want to write thank you notes or whatever it happens to be. The fact that I can see that gives me enough brain chatter where I'm like, maybe that's actually a higher priority. Maybe I should actually be doing that right now, and then sort of derail my plans because I can talk myself into changing them.
Does it help you? Because I know when I got a lot going on, what I think is most important to have in front of you is what you're doing now and what you're doing next. Everything else is noise. So can you start your day, and when you're looking at your first task of the day, you write down and put it in front of you, even if it's on a sticky note. What are you doing now? What are you doing next? Because having those, the now keeps you focused. The next helps the transition.
Yeah, maybe I'll try the analog thing a little bit. So looking at Todoist in the morning and then writing down the next thing on my notebook, or writing down the next couple of things and having the notebook in front of me.
All right. Keep experimenting. That's how we figure stuff out. And, and because we have ADHD, then experimental mindset is so important because we're going to figure out what works. And then we're going to realize that, wait, when did that thing stop working? Has it been weeks, months? What? So keep experimenting. Roxie?
I just thought of something when Samantha was talking, and I started doing this a few months ago where I created transition tasks. So I have the things that I'm doing in my little work blocks, but then I've got a transition time where I do some kind of self-care. So that for me can actually be going for a little walk, or you said something about writing thank you notes. That could be a time for me where I do something like that. But it's helped me to organize my day to be able to see that transition space and then put a few kind of little fun mini things in for 15 minutes, half hour max before I move to my next work block.
Awesome. All right. Hopefully that was helpful for you, Sam. I know we have some more questions here. I see that Roger asked a question, and I just want to respond to it because it's a pretty quick question to answer. Does a quote unquote best app exists to help those with adult ADHD? Do we all want to, in unison, say it together? 1, 2, 3.
No.
No.
No. I thought you were going to do the best one is the one you use in unison. My bad.
And that is the if we're playing Family Feud or ADHD Feud, that would be the second top answer. Yeah, but there isn't. How many of us have spent more money and time that we want to even acknowledge exploring all the productivity apps there are, thinking that, this is going to be this thing that solves all the problems, until we realize it's not. And we rinse and repeat so many times. And after a while, you realize, maybe the actual issue is not the app.
Yeah. The productivity system that you are always going to want is going to be the next one every time.
Love that. All right. What is our next question?
What is the relationship between dyspraxia and ADHD and autistic traits?
All right, let me speak to that last part first, ADHD and autistic traits. A couple of years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago, I think it was in the Journal of Attention Disorders. There was an article that talked about the high level of what they called autistic traits in this article with ADHD. So meaning not necessarily someone with autism, but people with ADHD having traits that coincide with autism. And it was super high. I mean, we're talking like the high 70s percentile. So yeah, I mean, I know for myself, like I go into an environment that I don't usually see someone in. This is probably my biggest like quote unquote autistic trait. I'll go in the store and I'll see someone that I usually see somewhere else. I cannot place how I know this person. It has led to many, many awkward, embarrassing moments that, maybe I can laugh at now. But yeah, so, sensory stuff. As far as dyspraxia, I don't really have knowledge data to speak to that. Will?
I was just going to add on to the autism piece because I'm currently going through an autism evaluation and just because it's something thought I should look into and finally got around to scheduling. And one of the things I was talking with my psychologist about is that while I do have a lot of autistic traits and behaviors, it's often that my ADHD is driving those behaviors rather than autism itself. So I might have trouble figuring out my turn to speak in a conversation, which is considered usually an autism trait, but that could be far more driven by my inattention to how the conversation is flowing, or sensory issues where it's not just the issue of this clothing being uncomfortable. It's like, oh, I can't ignore it because ADHD is not letting me not focus on that stimulus. And so being like, okay, who's driving the bus in this situation can be kind of interesting with, yeah, there's going to be overlap, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's one thing or another. And another idea that was really interesting that my psychologist mentioned to me is that it is more likely for someone with autism to have ADHD than the other way around. There is definitely overlap in how the diagnosis works. It's more likely for autistic people to also have ADHD rather than ADHD people to also be autistic.
Well, and thankfully, up until a couple of years ago with the DSM-5, DSM-4 said you can't have both. And if you talk to any clinician who works in the field and works with people with ADHD and autism, they can tell you that's absurd. Because I think when I was doing my clinical work, where I was working with my other specialty was autism, I think I had one client ever who I would say it was just like pure without ADHD, and it was almost confusing to me because it was like in some ways so different. It's really just pure case of a spectrum disorder without ADHD. So, again, like ADHD and autism and all these things, like everyone's going to present a little bit differently.
I just want to throw out there what dyspraxia is, because I bet there's people listening who are like, the what
I was gonna
now?
Get there. Yeah, go for it.
It's a coordination disorder. So it's like fine motor control most significantly. And the gist of it is like, you're kind of clumsy. Like that's a lot of what it looks like.
Do you walk into walls? Do you not know where your body ends and the rest of the world begins? Like that's right. Dyspraxia. Yeah.
And it's comorbid with ADHD, just like it seems like almost everything sometimes. But so there is a relationship. So this isn't a wild question by any stretch of the imagination. Like it's there. And dyspraxia, the simple fact that I felt like I had to say, let me explain to the ADHD nerds who listen to this podcast, what dyspraxia is, right? So it's not that well known, which means it's entirely possible that you or the ADHD person who you love, spouse, kid, brother, sister, might have some full-on dyspraxia or some elements of dyspraxia. And that might be part of why they're not doing some of the stuff that you might anticipate them being able to do, right? Like dyspraxia can make it hard to write, for example. You might have terrible handwriting and that can be in here somewhere. So just to kind of elucidate what's going on with that specific disorder.
I think this is a good place to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more questions that we are going to answer. So we will be right back. Growth through community. That is the mission for our award-winning coaching and accountability groups, where support will also continue in our alumni community. Every season, our goal is to empower our members on the road to discovery of how they can live a more productive and wholehearted life with ADHD. As someone with ADHD, I know what it's like to face ADHD challenges alone, and that is why I created these groups. Because my hope, our hope, is that through these groups, you will find that you are not alone in those challenges and that you don't have to face those challenges alone. Registration for our 28th season of coaching and accountability groups is open. Did you miss our kickoff registration event last week? Don't worry, it is not too late. We would love to have you join our next registration event on Thursday, February 17th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. To find out more, go to coachingrewired.com. Registration is by invitation only. And if you've been keen on joining a coaching group led by me and you weren't able to attend last week's registration event, I highly encourage you to join our upcoming registration event, since I will only be facilitating one coaching group this coming season. Otherwise, head on over now to coachingrewired.com and add your name to our spring season interest list. To get your invitation, after you've gone to coachingrewired.com, you'll be asked to confirm your email. Then we're going to send you a 35-minute pre-recorded presentation, which includes all the details you will need to know about the group. Alongside of that, there will be a quiz that goes along with the video that we'll ask you to submit. And since we like to know a little bit about you before you join us for registration, we also ask that you will send us a 45-second introductory video, and we have prompts for you to tell us about yourself. And don't worry, you will get all the details for all of the pre-registration requirements in the emails that you'll receive once you've added your name to our spring interest list and confirmed your email at coachingrewired.com. And for our friends on the other side of this spinning ball over in Australia and New Zealand and any other countries that are in those time zones, we have a group tailored for your time zone. Coach Kat Hoyer will be offering her section for you on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Time. We are still nailing down a date and time to hold a registration event for your time zone, since we know that our North American registration events would be in the middle of the night for you. So keep checking your email and coachingrewired.com for updates on the registration event just for you. Discover more and check out our spring season schedule by going to coachingrewired.com. Remember, registration is by invitation only. Don't wait to the last minute. Our groups fill up fast, so don't wait. Join the ADHD program built for adults with ADHD by adults with ADHD who just get it. And our hope is that when you join our groups, you won't feel helpless or hopeless anymore. That's coachingrewired.com. And we are back. All right. What is our next question?
The next question is from Therese. I'm finally seriously considering trying ADHD meds. Can you explain how a day on the meds feels compared to a day not on meds? Thanks. I think Brendan has something to say.
Go for it.
It depends on the meds, right? It depends on how they affect you. So as a guy who is playing with his meds at the moment, it's interesting because I know my meds are working, to go with the positive first, I guess, when I do stuff that I wouldn't ordinarily do. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of effort in it. One of the most significant examples for me is the first time I ever took ADHD meds, I graded 120 poems in one day and did 5 loads of laundry and was able to interact with my in-laws who had also showed up that day with not a lot of effort. It didn't seem like a big deal. And then another example on a smaller scale is part of how my ADHD presents is there could be a marker on the floor in the middle of the kitchen and I will walk past it. I'll see it. I'll know that it's there. I'll even know that it shouldn't be there. But the part of my brain that has the impulse to pick that thing up and put it somewhere else doesn't fire. It doesn't, nothing happens there. When my ADHD meds work, I pick up that marker and I do something with it, right? And that's a much smaller example, but it also is a really meaningful one, especially for my wife. So
I sometimes pick up the marker on my meds, not always.
Yeah. But also when you're taking ADHD meds, when you first start them, and I'm playing with Vyvanse at the moment, there's a lot of ways it can affect you that may or may not be what you want, right? Like it's very personal, very anecdotal. Vyvanse has made it hard for me to fall asleep. Vyvanse gave me this weird, when you watch a movie and they have that person who is supposed to be the stereotypical, like dumb airhead person, male or female, I'm not using airhead derogatorily in that way. And like everyone's going out to a party and they turn to that person and they're like, let's all go to the party. And the person responds with like, but I'm eating ice cream, as though that means they can't go to the party. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of scene in a movie. That was me on the level of Vyvanse I was taking earlier. Like whatever I was doing, no matter, and it not in an aggressive way, not like but I'm eating ice cream, in a very like, but I'm doing this. Like what do you mean I should do that other thing that I am not doing right now? I'm doing this. I almost couldn't understand why I might want to like eat, for example. I would have the thought of like, hey, and Vyvanse is supposed to do that too. It's also used for overeating. But whatever it was, there would be like this cognitive, you should go do that other thing, but emotionally and physically, like nothing. So now we're messing with that to see if we can get a better dosage.
Right on.
Lots of stuff like that can happen too, until you get it right.
I think to echo what Brendan said, like it's going to depend on the meds. It's going to depend on you. Not everybody will have the right meds on the first try, and a good practitioner will be willing to experiment and try different ones out if the first one doesn't work. I was really lucky that the first ones that I tried, I'm on Vyvanse, did work. And the biggest thing that I notice is that, kind of the same as Brendan, is things that I wouldn't ordinarily do, like pick up the sock off the floor that's over there that I will maybe pick up later, just becomes easier. If my meds are working effectively, the house is significantly cleaner than it would be. I found it very interesting when I had first started meds that I could have a decision or a thought in my head and then actually act on it without some kind of mental or emotional resistance. Some days are better than others. If Moira were here, she would say, if you have a cycle or if you're somebody with ovaries, the time of the month will determine how your meds work. And so, depending on the practitioner, you can talk to your doctor about having different dosages for the different times of the month for you. So what you take in your care week may differ from the premenstrual week. And in general, for everybody, like we can't expect the meds to be the know-all, end-all, be-all. There are skills that are involved with taking meds as well. So meds are great. Paired with tools and skills and community is tenfold better. And just to reiterate, just also know that it could take some experimenting to find the right dosage and the right medication for you.
I would even add to assume that you're not going to get the right medication or right dose the first try. They call them medication trials. I always find it so sad when I hear that someone tried a medication, they had an adverse response to it, and then just kind of gave up on it, which is it's really too bad. Some of the challenges also include things like doctors being afraid to prescribe higher doses, and sometimes higher doses are needed. Sometimes those doses are actually higher than what is recommended by the FDA. But your doctor can still, if they know what they're doing, they can still prescribe that if they know what they're doing. Back to the original question, one of the ways I like to sort of describe that feeling of my meds kicking in. Without the meds, I feel like my brain is an engine, but I'm stuck in neutral. When the meds kick in, it actually shifts into drive. Otherwise, I'm just thinking about other things I need to do, but my gravity when I'm in a chair is heavier when I don't have my meds. When my meds kick in, I can I have the thing I need to do. Oh, I need to get up to do that. Oh, I'm getting up now. All right. So the other thing for me is that the quieting of all of these simultaneous thoughts, that to me was one of the biggest things for me that allowed me for the very first time, and this is 20 some years ago, to read a chapter of a book and actually know what I read, because I wasn't having 30 other deep thoughts about the first sentence that I read. Now that I'm 10 pages in, I have no idea what I read other than I read all these words, right? So it quiets the thoughts and allows you to focus on ideally the one thing you're working on.
I love the idea of Adderall as gravity medication, by the way. That's awesome.
Well,
A couple things that are popped into my head with this is, yeah, your analogy of like an engine, like I have a lot of like, my brain's just not catching. I'll be talking and have long, very exaggerated pauses as my brain searches for very simple words. Like I need to get the mop. It's like, oh yeah, that good. But along with that, the big worry with medication is the side effects. And we have to understand there's side effects for not taking the meds too, because when I'm not taking my meds, I'm not taking as good care of myself because I can't. It is harder for me to do those simple things in my life that are going to let me live a better life. And so I'm not brushing my teeth as much. I'm not eating as healthy foods, and I'm not going out to exercise as regularly. And those things are really important for my health. So I'm going to have the side effect of not doing those things, which is a side effect of not taking the meds. Or even like answering text messages. So much easier to answer a text message when I'm on my medication. And then finally, the whole like pills don't teach skills. So yes, you can take Adderall. My first time I was on Adderall, I was really, really good at answering messages on Reddit. And that wasn't great.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, everyone is going to have a different response to the medications. And I think probably one of the most common behavioral side effects is agitation, and often will present when you're coming off of the medication. I would say that should be a side effect that you don't need to tolerate. Talk to your doctor. If it's like a big deal, like then it's not the right fit or not the right dosage or not the right timing. There's lots of things that could be played with when you're taking medication, but it really is like, especially if you are new to ADHD and you're wondering about medication. I know that there are some people out there in the ADHD community who try to not give an opinion on medication and say, that's up to you and your doctor. I'm not one of those people. Try medication. Try it. If it might not work for you, you might not be able to tolerate it. Most people can. Most people have a positive treatment response. I've seen way too many people who have this idea in their head that medication is bad and it should be a last resort, and their life becomes a complete shit show. And they finally take medication, start medication as a last resort. And now they can't get that time back when they realize, oh my gosh, why did I wait so long to try this medication? Everything kind of just makes sense. And it's like, you're not getting a tattoo. It's a medication. You take it, it doesn't respond well to you. It's out of your system in, short as a couple hours, late as the end of the day.
One of the things I like to do to address that idea, because some people are like, I don't want to take medication because I don't like the side effects, or I'm worried about the side effects. I often just try to change the language on that and say like, okay, well, what are the side effects of ADHD? And how do the side effects of ADHD compare to the side effects of ADHD medication? And what happens to the ADHD side effects when you take it, right? Like, so that we're using the same language, because often ADHD symptoms and ADHD medication side effects, we don't feel like we're necessarily can compare those two things, but we really should be. The other piece that I wanted to jump on real quick, and then I'll shut up, is the aggravation that can come with ADHD meds. That's why I'm playing with medication at the moment, is because for me, that aggravation was manageable until we all started living through a global pandemic and worldwide trauma event. Because don't forget that that's happening, people. That's the first time. I have to say that twice this time because I missed the last month. But all of a sudden, my baseline level of aggravation and anxiety was higher because of the drama and stress of COVID. And when that baseline got increased a little bit more, when the medication wore off, that wasn't a good plan for me or my family. And that's why I'm playing with other medications. So in case that's a layer or a thing that other folks might want to pay attention to, I thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, go try medication, see if that works for you. And it's okay to medicate your kids. Not like, hey, I want them to just be normal. I want them to learn the skills. And if they have that medication when they're younger, it's easier for them to learn those executive function skills so that it's easier to apply when they're older.
There is also data that shows that kids who are treated with ADHD medication also have a higher likelihood of not meeting ADHD criteria into adulthood. Right? Doesn't mean there won't be some struggles, but by allowing the brain to sort of do the things that it needs to be doing, it actually strengthens how your neurons sort of connect and kind of gives your brain a fighting chance. So, man, it is medication. Try it if you've been on the fence. All right. I know we have a couple other medication questions, so maybe we can get to those a little bit later. We have another question coming up live. We have Gerald, and then we will take a quick break. All right, Gerald, what is your question?
Yeah, so like a lot of us, I've been working from home during the pandemic, and I'm a full-time grad student right now, and all my classes are online. So my life is very unstructured. And while my wife has loved that for herself, I've hated it. And I struggle to start my day, to figure out what I'm doing throughout my day, to maintain focus on things. I go out to coffee shops a lot to help with that, which isn't ideal in a pandemic and isn't ideal financially. So I was just wondering what tips people have for structuring our time and maintaining focus in, this era of a global pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Gerald. The very first thing that came to my mind is creating accountability. Anything that is going to get you to check in with someone else, anything that is going to also be helpful to someone else. So that check-in sort of serves that dual purpose of it's helping you, but it's also helping that other person. I find that when both of those things are in place, accountability really tends to work the best. And it could also be something like going to adult study hall. There are a lot of people who are studying in adult study hall. Committing to being there at certain times is also an option for you. And there are other programs out there that can help you with that kind of stuff. I just have to say kudos for you for even like trying grad school during a pandemic when you're having to do all this remote, because man, that does sound really, really hard. Experiment though. Like you might find that for a while going to the coffee shop works great, but then it doesn't. So then you got to try another environment. Brendan, you got something?
I was going to say, even things like theming your days or time blocking, like that stuff can be helpful. If you're, I don't know, every Tuesday I do the laundry or something, right? Like that's an example of theming, right? Like I do, I don't know, kitchen cleaning on Tuesdays or something, or I do X from 9 a.m. until 10. I'm always going to go for a walk or something. Like those sorts of things that get us moving and keep us with consistent expectations around what we're going to do daily or weekly can be helpful too.
Joe, one other thing that I don't know if you have accommodations with the school that you're at, but maybe having regular meetings with your professors, like weekly meetings to kind of check in, gives you that actual real accountability. And I always think that when as an adult student with ADHD, develop relationships with those professors. Because remember, it's the professor that gives the grade. It's not just the grade itself, right? So
those relationships are
go ahead.
Those relationships will also make you care more about what's going on in the class,
right? Which help the brain.
Yeah.
Will?
An idea that I've picked up from Brendan before is also just build yourself a commute, because commutes often let us mentally prepare to do our work. And oftentimes our new commute is kitchen to a table, maybe also in the kitchen. So we take 5 steps and we're like, I'm mentally ready. So we're like, oh, okay, I'm going to put on a backpack and walk around the block. And then when I get home, it's going to be just sitting down and doing work. And tends to be easier because you're like, okay, now I've segmented my day so that this is the time to work, rather than just having, oh, I'm still in the kitchen and I see there's still dishes to do.
Gerald, I hope that was helpful for you. Good luck with your studies. We are going to take one more quick break. And when we come back, we have more answers for your questions. So we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from Adult Study Hall by ADHD reWired at adultstudyhall.com, our judgment-free, shame-free co-working community for adults with ADHD, just like you and me. From our weekly guided and facilitated sessions to our 24/7 drop-in room, there are plenty of ways you can optimize your productivity to get more done using real-time accountability. It's only $19.99 a month, and it's free for the first week to try, and you can cancel your membership at any time. If you're looking for facilitated sessions to boost your productivity, join our ASH Plus sessions, which are our themed and guided sessions. We have sessions for decluttering. We have job searches led by Coach Kat Hoyer, who's also an HR specialist. We have sessions for tackling dreaded tasks, for working out, for writing, and more. We are also going to be starting a new ASH Plus session for managing finances, budgets, and tax-related to-dos. That's starting this week, so go check out the events calendar once you join at adultstudyhall.com. The doors are open, and we'd love to have you. Get to know more about our Ash Plus sessions and our 24/7 drop-in room now by going to adultstudyhall.com and join the virtual co-working community built just for us. That's adultstudyhall.com. If you're listening to this early enough on the day it came out on February 8th, 2022, we are going live today for our monthly live Q&A at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. We do this every second Tuesday of the month. I am joined by Brendan Mahan from the ADHD Essentials podcast, Will Curb from Hacking Your ADHD, MJ Siemens from the ADHD Diversified podcast, Coach Moira Maybin with the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle podcast, and joining us on the panel for their first live Q&A is our newest ADHD rewired coach, Kat Hoyer. And come meet my new assistant and community manager, Lisa Ciesla. Welcome to the team, Kat and Lisa. To join us today and every second Tuesday of the month, head on over to adhddiversified.ca/events to register and discover more about the ADHD Rewired podcast family by going to adhdrewired.com/podcast network. And if you really love ADHD Rewired and find a value in this podcast, one of the best ways that you can show your support is by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast player that accepts reviews, and share your favorite episode with your family and friends. I also want to send a big thank you to Barb McDonough for her last 2 years with ADHD Rewired. Barb has let the team spend more time with her family. On behalf of our entire community, thank you for everything. We truly wish you all the best, and you will be missed.
And we're back.
All right. What is the next question for us?
If you are on medication, have you found that over the last year or so, your medication has not been working as efficiently as it was before?
So this is actually a tricky question because historically people with ADHD are kind of bad self-reporters. Part of the framework of executive functions includes self-awareness. So while it may feel like it's not working as well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not. And I don't say that to make anyone kind of feel like invalidated if they feel their meds aren't working as well. What I think is important to do if you're thinking that, if you're feeling that, is to ask people who are around you often how they are observing kind of what's going on with you. If you can track something over a period of time around your medication as a way to have some data over the long run, and it doesn't need to be complex, like 0 to 10, how hard was it for me to get started today, right? And so just by doing something like that, it can kind of help you see if you do kind of dip a little bit. The other thing, if your doctor is open to trying a bump in a dose, you'll also see like I've tried a bump in my dose before, and it just like stepped on the gas to my anxiety. I was like, oh, nope, coming back down. So it's, sometimes you got to try and experiment a little bit, but I definitely can relate to that idea of, could it be better? Any other thoughts on that? Now we can do another medication question.
No, I'll go.
Okay.
I mean, you're kind of setting me up for it, right? Look at that time frame, the last year and a half or so. Something about a global pandemic, right? Like stuff's been harder. Things has just been harder for the last year and a half. So it might not be the medication. I was talking to a client today. I'm going to wander a little bit, but this matters. Because he was saying the same thing. He's like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have trouble managing my frustration and stuff. I seem to be less resilient than I used to be. And I was like, that's not what's going on. What's happening is the water changed, right? Like oftentimes we wonder, is the fish sick because the fish is sick, or is the fish sick because the water is toxic, right? Is it the fish or is it the water? Our water is different than it was a year and a half ago. And so it is not necessarily the case that our meds are working less effectively or that we're less resilient. The environment that we're in has changed. And that's why I keep saying, like, we're living through a global pandemic, right? Our water is different and that's affecting us, and that's okay. I mean, I don't love it any more than the rest of you do, but if we can give ourselves permission to be in more toxic water, then we can adapt to our new environment a little more effectively and be able to meet our expectations or potentially adjust our expectations as necessary.
Well,
And just to add on to what Brendan was saying there, this is an ongoing event. So trying to heal from your trauma while going through the trauma, it's not going to work as well as you'd want it to. Everything's going to be harder. It's going to take more time. And we're not going to be like, oh, I'm better while going through the trauma.
All right. What's the next medication question here?
The next one, I just recently started ADHD meds in same situation, very productive and motivated, but not speedy. Still feel scatterbrained though. Should meds help with this too? Other than this, no side effects. Concerta is what he's on, he or she.
Okay. Maybe it can help with the scatterbrainness. I would also wonder, how's your sleep? Because I know that if you're not getting good sleep, like there's no amount of medication that's going to help with that. And I know for me, like when I don't sleep well, I can't finish a full thought. My brain's like, I'm the pinball inside the machine, bouncing all over the place. And like, I can't sustain, more complex thoughts. So I feel kind of scatterbrained. There are other things you can also do to explore cognitive sort of hyperactivity. Meditation to sort of observe the mind in action can be really helpful. What have all of your experiences been as far as that quote unquote scatterbrainness with medication? Anything?
If I'm interpreting this correctly, like my scatterbrainness happens more when my meds are starting to wear off.
Yeah. All right. Roxie, look like you were thinking about something there.
Oh, I was looking at the chat, but I mentioned earlier that, like what you said, Eric, if my sleep is off, it impacts how my meds work. I just started doing some exercise and it's mild. It's just like all I have to do is 10 minutes a day. But even that, just to get me going, I feel like I have more ability to concentrate for the next hour or two. How much protein I'm getting, there's so many things. And I don't know what's the thing that really helps support the meds. So I'm just trying to throw everything I can at it to make it as effective as I possibly can.
All right. Yeah. And talk to your doctor, like share that concern with your doctor and see if there's anything that they think they may be able to help you with. All right. Next topic here. Let's see if we can power through a bunch of these.
Well, the next one is Erica. How do I set myself up for success and get out of bed so I can walk my dogs before work now that it's wintertime?
Dog owners?
Who wants to walk their dogs in the wintertime? I mean, we do. Maybe it's needing to write out a morning routine that involves those transitions to getting to walk your dog, because when it's cold and going outside, it really just makes that transition even harder because, who wants to go out in the cold? Something that helps me and my also ADHD partner is to have the dog leash and our jackets and gloves and whatever else you need, doggy bags, set up in a space that you were not looking for them, because it's so hard to want to go outside in the winter. Placing everything we need just to get set up to go out in places that'll have the least resistance has generally been helpful. I'm going to be honest though, like really trying to take that first step outside is like, you almost have to like, come on, let's go. Like, you really got to motivate yourself to step out there. But usually once we're outside, it's okay. But there's something about that transition from indoor, outdoor, like literally it's this much room to just get out the door.
And I think too that like looking at anything that involves something that requires multiple steps, right? The first thing in the morning, like things like setting that up the night before is going to make it easier. So whether it's working out or getting your work stuff ready or walking a dog when it is stupid degrees out, right? It's going to make that easier. Barb, what do you do?
Accountability helps. It's a little easier for me just because my husband, very motivated. I mean, it could be raining outside and he'll go walk the dog. So it helps because he's the one who will say, come on, let's go for a walk. So I would suggest to anybody else, if you don't have somebody, a partner or somebody in the house, maybe there's a friend. It's just a matter of, a little FaceTime just to get out the door and start doing some exercise too. It's good for the dog.
Awesome. All right. What's our next question?
Any tips for how to get started on work in the morning? I usually end up spending hours on my phone. And if I keep my phone away, I spend hours in the kitchen. I am on WFH for 2 years. I don't know what that means. I have a huge barrier for getting started. Oh, work from home. Okay. So a huge barrier for getting started.
Yeah. So starting is the hardest part. Things that make starting easier: setting things up ahead of time, having accountability, having an actual meeting that you have to be at to kind of start the day, making it harder to do the things that distract you. Even, things like dressing for work, which I know maybe sounds ridiculous if you're like, I'm home, I want to be comfortable. But for a lot of people, just that sort of something kind of gets activated in the brain when you actually put on work clothing. And yeah, you could probably get away if you're doing virtual stuff or stuff on video of just going top up. Maybe that's enough for you to sort of get into the work mode. But, try these little things. But don't work alone. If you're struggling alone, like there's resources out there, this adult study hall, there's things like that to get accountability when we know what it is that we need to do, but we know we're having a hard time doing it on our own. We got to bridge that gap with accountability. Brendan?
Also, and this circles back to what Will was talking about earlier, build in transition time. Give yourself a commute. And it doesn't have to be driving somewhere. It can be. You can hop in your car and drive, 15 minutes away from your house, then 15 minutes back if you want to. If you have a treadmill, hop on the treadmill. I have my best days when I walk on my treadmill for like a half an hour in the morning and then jump into my work stuff. That transition to work is critical and it'll change your life, especially if you can make it something kind of physical where you're moving your body and exercising and that kind of stuff. I like the treadmill because it feels like I'm going somewhere, even though I'm not. So it feels a little more like a commute, like I'm walking to work. And also dressing for work is critical too. I tried renting a tux for a little while, but I found myself spying on my neighbors. So I had to stop using the tux. Spy joke, nobody, nothing. Come on. But dressing a little more nice is a good call.
All right, cool. Let's go to another question here.
Do you see, she's asking actually about the program. I assume she means the coaching program. Do you see this program as a good fit for folks who have been diagnosed for a long time and are feeling okay about most things in their life?
Yeah, there's actually a lot in that question. We have people who are recently diagnosed, to been diagnosed for a long time, to been diagnosed for a long time, but are now just recently beginning to address it. It's coaching. It's not a therapy group, right? So my hope is that a lot of people are coming in with things kind of being okay in most areas of life, and they know it could be better, right? So absolutely. So that's my short, quick answer to that question. All right, let's go to another question. And
next question about adult study hall. Can you tell me more about adult study hall?
I swear no one's paying us to I'm not paying anyone to ask these questions.
They're up in the chat.
How can I help with accountability? The idea of body doubling, where you have are just working with someone else, is, it activates those mirror neurons, which our brain says, oh, the people around me are doing a thing. I'm supposed to be doing that thing too, right? I mean, it's at a very simplest level. That's why it works, right? We have sessions where there's more interaction, right? So for some of we call them ASH Plus, which are our guided and facilitated sessions. It's just a little bit of facilitation and mostly just you're working on the stuff that you're sharing with others that you're going to do. And then at the very end of that time, you report how you did, right? So it's pretty low key type of accountability, but it's real time accountability. It's not going to be spoon fed to you. You got to come into the room and do the work. But if you can get yourself there, I think that you're going to find that it really helps. All right. Let's go for a non-ADHD rewired advertising question.
All right.
As much as I love those questions.
And they did come up. So those were just maybe some follow-up.
Yeah, adultstudyhall.com.
So let's see.
Oh, Barb.
Yes.
There was a question earlier that was a little bit long, and I'm hoping that maybe I've interpreted it the way that I'm thinking that it's being asked. And I hope I'm getting this right, is I was diagnosed 1.5 years ago and learned that a lot of childhood trauma is tightly wound with years of undiagnosed ADHD behavior. I'm working on it right now with a therapist, but my hyperfocus, it kicks in early on with big projects, but later I can't seem to stay interested, and everything else feels like I'm walking in mud, even if I give myself rewards. So my interpretation of the question is, how do I stay motivated after the initial excitement is done?
Isn't that the $1 million question?
It really is. To me, I don't think, well, it kind of is a matter of motivation, but I think with anything that is considered being successful, or, a lot of books and stuff talk about motivation, stay motivated, be motivated. If you're not motivated enough, then you're not going to care enough to do it, da, 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 da. There's also an emotional regulation component that's hard to maintain generally, in my experience anyway. And ADHD brains, we like novelty. When it's not novel anymore, it's boring, which is why earlier when I said I like to change up the apps that I use for my to-do list and stuff, just because I need the novelty, not because it's not working, but also being very aware that I'm not changing it because I don't think it works. I'm changing it because of novelty. But if there's part of the question was working on a long-term project, yes, it's motivating in the beginning. Later on, I get it. It can feel boring.
We know that our intelligence or our IQ, ADHD and executive function have nothing to do with our IQ. But what we need to do is raise our YQ. What I mean by that, and we talk about this in our coaching groups, is, when let's say we write down a task or a goal, we're writing it down because at that moment we're like, this is important enough to me that I'm actually going to be writing this down. So we write down a little bit of information about this task to cue us for later, except that when we go back to this task later, we're like, I don't know why I want to do this. And so we just see this what the task is, without any connection to why it mattered to us. So whether you're starting a project, you're doing a task, one of the things that you may find helpful is not just adding the what, but also adding the why. And how is that why going to cue you, right? So not just a cue for it's time to do the task, but a cue that when you're looking at that task, a reminder for yourself that says, and this is actually why it matters for you, right? Because I think that we lose that. And we know that part of the physiology of ADHD is that part of our brain that goes to our amygdala, the stuff that sort of drives that emotional components of our actions. The sort of the highways between our prefrontal cortex, where all those executive functions seem to take place, and sort of more of our emotional driven parts of our brain, those highways are in a constant traffic jam. So that information doesn't flow real well. So it's almost like a bad cell phone reception. And if you lose enough, the reception's bad enough, the call gets dropped. Like you just forget why you were motivated. I know when I first was diagnosed with ADHD, I used to call it by like 95% disorder, because I would like do tasks and projects up to the 95% point, and then I'd be like, all right, I'm going to move on now. All right. I always say starting is the hardest part, but as soon as you start, actually finishing, getting to the end is the hardest part. Brendan?
I just want to do something a little different than we usually do and say that we already answered this question throughout this episode. And I'm not doing this to be obnoxious. I'm doing it because sometimes the stuff we talk about with a little bit of a tweak or from another perspective can address other things. So I'm going to play with stuff we've already talked about and weave it into the answer to this question. So the question was, basically, I'm starting, but then I don't want to anymore, right? Like my motivation gets lost after I've started. I have trouble continuing. Barb mentioned in reading one question earlier that a lot of these questions seem to be about motivation. So the first thing I want to point out is that you're not alone, because recognizing that you're not alone is going to help you feel some comfort around where you are. And that's going to drop some of that anxiety and help you move forward and stick with this task a little bit further. Might not get you to the finish line, but it'll get you a little bit closer. Also, Eric pointed out that one of the things that helps him get stuff done was to have a now sign, sticky note, whatever, Asana board, and then a next sticky note, Asana board, sign, whatever. You can do that for an individual task too, right? What am I doing right now with regard to this task? What's coming next with regard to this task? Maybe you're not making sticky notes about it. Maybe you're just keeping it in your head because it's like a 10-minute task or whatever, but you can use that strategy as well. Also, going back to the emotional world, we talked about pandemic forgiveness stuff and sort of normalizing that our water has gotten more toxic. So if you're struggling to continue into a task and you're beating yourself up about that, and you're feeling terrible and thinking that you suck and that's making it harder for you to keep going, give yourself some permission to struggle, give yourself some forgiveness around that difficulty. It's okay. And part of why it might be a little harder now than it used to be is that we're living through this global pandemic. Also, we talked a ton about medication in this episode. Medication will help you stick to it and continue on once you've started. I don't know where this questioner is with regard to medication, but I'm throwing that out there. And then finally, accountability has come up a few times, both in terms of the ADHD rewired coaching and accountability groups and the online adult study hall stuff, and also just find yourself a buddy, right? Find yourself a friend or a family member or a coworker who can help you kind of feel some accountability around getting through to the next stage of this task. So I hope that didn't come across as too obnoxious. I just wanted to say that, like, oftentimes we're answering these questions in one way, but they apply to other things.
For sure. All right. I think we can do one more question here. Barb, can you pick a good one for us?
They're all good, but yes, I can. Let's see.
Can we do a mashup of all, like make all of the questions one question?
Right. I wish.
I just made all the answers one answer. So
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, let's answer this one. Any suggestions on how to convince my 23-year-old son to learn more about his ADHD and related symptoms and how they impact his life and mood? He doesn't like to listen to his dad. How do we handle that? Somebody we love, huh?
They're 23, they're an adult.
Yeah. I mean, and if obviously you're concerned, and one of the things that you may want to consider is saying, here's our concerns. You're an adult. It's your choice. If you feel you're ready to learn about this, here's one or two resources. It's up to you. You're an adult. And I think just giving them that sense of, oh, like my parents are trusting me to actually make decisions and they're not feeling like, oh, I have to do this thing, right? I think can really help. It is, call it immature, call it oppositional behavior. As soon as for a lot of people with ADHD, tell someone that they have to do something, the first thing they don't want to do is the thing you're telling them to do, right? Like, I'm horrible at returning phone calls. If someone leaves me a message and they're like, don't worry if you don't call me back, I get it, like increases the likelihood that I'm actually going to call them back like 100 times. It's silly, but it works. So don't make them do the thing, offer it, and it's totally up to them if they want to take that. And I think that How to ADHD is a great starting point for learning about ADHD, especially a young adult, because it's really accessible, it's short, and it's good information. MJ?
Yeah, coming from somebody who historically, like in the past, like I was kind of that person that was like, well, it can't be ADHD. I can't be ADHD. ADHD is not a thing. And when I started exploring it for myself, like I really had to make that decision for me to say, okay, maybe I'll go for an assessment. Maybe I'll see what this is really all about. And actually the How to ADHD page was YouTube channel with Jessica McCabe was what helped me really think like, oh, maybe that's the thing. Maybe this is it. My partner is actually the one who was pointing out like some ADHD traits because he is ADHD too. But I was, again, that person that's like, no, I don't want to. The truth is that I'm stupid and I'm lazy. That's it. But I'm not, and we're not. It's just trying to, it needs to be a personal choice to explore it. Mine are like parachutes. They work when they're open. I could have been bombarded with all the information that was available out there. But until I was open enough for myself to make the decision to learn more about it, there was just no way that I would have started at all. So it takes time.
Thanks, MJ.
Also, it's your kid, right? So sort of unconditional positive regard, just love your kid. And it's hard because you're probably also scared for your kid and worried, like, is he going to be okay? He's 21 years old now. His whole world ending and he's never going to amount to anything. That's not the case. Like, he's got decades and decades to figure this out. So love him and let him be where he is, which doesn't mean you don't help him to get to the next tier and the next level. It just means you help him to get there at his pace, not at your pace.
I'd also say be mindful of your own boundaries. I mean, I think it was 23.
23.
Like if he's walking all over you and not respecting your home if he's living at home, like, well, that needs to be addressed too. Like, if his ADHD is impacting you, like, that's on you to state what the boundaries are and what you're willing to, like, if he's living at home, what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not, right? He's an adult. Will?
I was just going to also mention ADHD TikTok. Not all of the information on there is accurate, but there is a ton of stuff where people go, that's not ADHD. That's just how everybody thinks. And you do that a few times and you go, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe that's not how everybody thinks.
I would, just from my own personal experience, if you are going to go into TikTok, have a life vest with someone holding onto the rope to pull you out. Because, oh my God, Will, when you send me your TikTok stuff, it's like, it's a 2-hour rabbit hole, almost guaranteed. This is why I have not been doing stuff on TikTok yet. I would love to do stuff on TikTok, but I cannot be trusted to open up that app on my own if I am by myself. So
that's very fair.
So it's amazing how much cool content there is on ADHD. There's also a lot of cool content that has nothing to do with ADHD. And it is literally just like it's like a dopamine, like, fire cannon of an app. So just be careful. All right. Will, do you have a moment of dad for us?
Do you know why koala bears aren't real bears?
Why?
Well, you might think it's because they're marsupials, but the real reason is that they don't have the right qualifications.
Oh my God.
That was good. That was good. Well, thank you for that. And I want to thank all of our panelists. We'll be back here next month. Thank you for everyone who asked a question. And if you found value in this, if you got your question answered, consider becoming a patron. It's one of the great ways that you can support the work that we are doing. You can do that at adhddiversified.com/Patreon. We'll be back same time next month. We will see you all then. Thanks, everybody. Bye. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is adhddiversified.ca. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD reWired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at adhddiversified.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD reWired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD reWired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, adhddiversified.com. If you're a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all of the shows on the ADHD reWired podcast network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great. Starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and the Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.